Good afternoon. My name is Ann Olson, and I'm the CEO at Converge Consulting. Thank you so much for choosing to attend our webinar. One of our core values at Converge is to bring to the marketplace new and next thinking. In our new and next webinar series, we've hand-selected partners that we feel are the best in the industry and provide additional value on topics that are critical. The goal of this webinar today is similar to a TED Talk in that we are hoping to inspire new thinking and bring to you case studies and best practices from the higher education marketplace. We also want to set the table for an advanced conversation on a topic that is important at all levels of an organization. If you are a CFO, real estate represents potentially the single largest asset on your balance sheet. If you're a chief marketing officer, your buildings and facilities are one of the key assets that drive your student experience. If you're a recruitment specialist, the brand of your institution is one of the primary drivers of a student attending and making sure they feel like your institution is a fit. I couldn't be more excited to introduce you to Craig Cassell from Cushman and Wakefield. Craig is a global leader of the education practice at Cushman and Wakefield. Craig has spent over 15 years of his career working with clients and is responsible for team assembly around the globe that focuses on creating and implementing strategic planning initiatives for educational entities. Some of his core expertise lies in demographic analysis, site selection and negotiations, construction management, operational efficiencies, property appraisal, and structured finance. Wow, that's quite the list. His webinar today covers both research relating to what tiers of specific students care about and several great case studies focused on understanding highest and best use of assets and understanding best real estate strategy. Thank you again, Craig, for your time today. With that, let's jump right in.
Thanks so much, Ann. Very appreciative of you allowing us the opportunity to talk to your core audience and share our thoughts and ideas. Hi, my name is Craig Cassell, and thank you for sharing a little bit of your time with me this afternoon. I lead Cushman and Wakefield's global education business based in Chicago. I'll provide more details on our organization later, but first let's get to the webinar's important topics. The genesis of the topics we plan to discuss started with conversations with Ann Olson and Jay Kelly, the two co-founders of Converge. As we listened to each other's experience and background, I shared the conversations I was having on a consistent basis with college and university leaders across the world. Essentially, my clients are both excited and worried. We are now in a time where education, the very foundation of pedagogy, is transforming like no time in recent memory. The modern college or university is essentially borderless, more stable than static. Classroom walls are both shrinking and expanding, and technology brings both wondrous advancements and new roadblocks to consider. The funding environment has also transformed, and we believe there are new methods to convert liabilities into assets. So I'll cover significant ground quickly because I want to reserve the appropriate amount of time for your questions. But the conversations with school leaders revolve around three key topics. Wanting to build new and remodel existing facilities, but unsure how to fund them. Can I leverage my real estate? Do I have to use my balance sheet, or are there structures out there which we are unaware of in the private sector? How do I drive operational savings, leverage vendors, leverage contracts? And third, and probably most important, how do I continue to enhance the student experience and attract and retain my students? There are so many ways to achieve your degrees today. There are so many competitors out there trying to keep up with the Joneses. What do I need to do to ensure the student experience is great? We plan to share responses to these questions as well as talk about what we see as the top challenges in higher education and discuss what students want and envision in their college experience. What exactly matters to the student these days? We think a lot about what the student has and their voice is forgotten, and so we want to share their perspective. But now I want to talk a little bit about our agenda. We plan to spend a few minutes talking about the challenges facing the higher education sector. Next, we'll hit on the facts about students, what they want and need from their schools. We'll touch on the solutions surrounding financing of facilities, driving savings through operational efficiencies, enhancing the student experience, what C&W can do to help, and then a brief Q&A session. So let's get started. As we look at the challenges in the education space, which we all have a good idea of what and how they are, we are focused our attention on 5 areas to dig into to start off: enrollment, tuition, student debt, funding, and competition. And we thought this pictorial portrayed some of the appropriate information. Bottom line is, after years of cuts across the board, college is less affordable and less accessible for students due to these factors. But we are not here to play Debbie Downer on all of you. We are here to share the facts and talk about solutions. So first, the facts. Enrollment. This chart describes a sharp decline in total enrollment over the last 4 years, as well as predictions for a moderate increase down the road. We need, as an industry, need to do a better way to find and improve and accelerate enrollment. Tuition, huge, huge issue. Obviously needs to be solved somehow, but as you'll see from a later slide, tuition impacts different student demographics differently. But tuition growth is outpacing inflation, and in certain areas, tuition growth has compensated for cuts in student services, eliminated course offerings, and faculty attrition. Student debt, great pictorial of the current environment revolving around student debt, student loan. Top right corner, less than half of student loans are being paid off currently, and the average student a few years ago owed more than $20,000 in student loans. Funding. Key takeaway is state funding remains below pre-recession levels, actually $10 billion in aggregate. So the average student cannot navigate the many obstacles to obtaining degrees, having to understand the different ways to figure out on how to fund their college degrees. And then last, in the top challenges in the higher education space, when the challenges above continue to spread, what we see as alternatives arise for students. The slide depicts the disruptors to the traditional college experience. As the price and skills gap widen, the venture and corporate-backed entities will continue to flourish. Maybe not yet with undergraduate students, but as more and more companies look for the refined skills, a shift may begin to happen. So what we see here is a handful of different companies that have and operators that have focused on the different credentialing and the different degrees that are potentially out there. Okay, enough with Chicken Little and Donald Trump, the sky is falling. Let's shift our attention to the students and what they want and need in their college experience. In order to assess how to prioritize solving the challenges above and allocating certain capital to projects, buildings, programs, we need to understand what the students of today want and need, as well as the student of 2020 and 2025. We took the time to review existing surveys, created our own, read blogs, forums, had personal discussions and conversations with many students across the world, and the information below is a subset of the answers we heard. We developed 3 tiers of importance in descending order, and we're frankly surprised by a few of the results we published. So don't be surprised. This is actually a pictorial of everything that's important into the student experience, but where certain students rated what was more important than others. So most surprising, actually, which we talked about a little bit above, was the cost of tuition. Was not a large factor in weighing this prospective data set of students' experience. It may be a factor when they're entering the college market, but once accepted, it seems that that's not a big factor to the students the data covered. There also must have not have been a lot of jocks in our data set because sports were not high on the list. Not surprising, a sense of belonging socially and civically were important, but security was not a top priority. This seems interesting because most school officials will tell you that this rate's almost the highest of their list, but from a student perspective, they must already feel safe in their protected environments already. High quality facilities and technology were at the top of the list as well, which segues well into our next topic and one of the main areas of discussion today. Facility solutions and financing. I think here is the first key points to talk about. And Anne had mentioned this earlier, but real estate may represent the largest asset on the balance sheet. Whether or not this is important, whether or not this represents who you are, but it's a fact. It's a fact that college universities have more than $250 billion worth of real estate assets on their balance sheet. In other real estate intensive industries such as hospitality, food and beverage, healthcare, all these organizations and companies have consistently found ways to leverage these assets without losing control. Simply put, we cannot afford to continue to increase cost in non-strategic areas. It's imperative to create more value with what you have. So what do we do? So assessing the financial condition and evaluate strategic real estate alternatives, which we'll talk about that process afterwards. But we have 2 case studies which may be interesting to the group and demonstrate ways to finance projects outside of the traditional way of bond financing and then lock in capital that may or may not know that is there. The first case study is the University of Maryland. And no, we did not get that picture wrong. That's not the Michigan M, that's the Maryland M. We verified it with Google and the university. So Maryland wanted to try to leverage non-core assets and vacant land to address capital, current capital needs and future capital needs, amongst other things. They also wanted to spur economic development around their campus and create a little bit more transient-oriented development around their campus. Significant capital events allowed dollars to be allocated to various projects on campus, which were currently not funded. We helped them structure P3 transactions with third-party developers and negotiated agreements with private companies to invest capital into owned assets for commercial use. The second case study, the University of California at Berkeley. Cal Berkeley, obviously, some serious challenges currently regarding preservation of capital and budget constraints. We've all read about them. But this case study takes a little bit different approach. This examines the ability to drive cost savings by eliminating third-party lease payments over a period of time and relocating programs, research teams, and other outside influences back to owned real estate on campus. Savings was over $55 million over a 5-year period of time, which allowed ability to accelerate new building projects. This may not be a solution for all of you, but it speaks to the position of being proactive about your footprint and the best use of funds. So for both of these examples, we were able to unlock some capital and drive capital to different projects that may or may not have been green-lighted, except for the ability to think a little bit more proactively and creative and outside the box. So again, we talked a little bit about what we do, assessing the financial condition and objectives by assembling the right team, evaluating the strategic alternatives, and once you've done those, once completed, the team can identify and recommend various structures available for each category and compare the economic costs, rating agency impact, long-term control, risk, and upside. So speaking of assessing capital, the operational efficiencies and are you being diligent with all the dollars you are given? How efficiently is the operations being run on your campus? Are you being a steward of the money which was entrusted to you by your students, government entities, and personal and corporate gifts? For the 10 years spanning from 2004 to 2014, most colleges did not. So how can schools be more savvy when it comes to operational efficiencies? I know you probably think, because I'm from the private side, we're going to talk about a total outsource or a little outsourcing, but that's not really what we believe, right? Sometimes yes, but I think a series of checks, balances, and benchmarks are vitally important to managing the expenses. You should know what all of your service costs and how competitive your pricing is. We have talked about a few initiatives below in terms of effective quality services, of driving value and reviewing contracts. But when thinking of what is the exercise worth and how long it will take, I think the next slide will surprise you. This depicts the average cost saving from our clients across the facility management spectrum at Cushman and Wakefield, of which the education sector is a part of. There's some big percentages on the page, and it may be worth having staff take the time to evaluate some of the initiatives and knowing the possibility that driving savings can be achieved. You are not being diligent with your dollars without benchmarking the data and running the process. We can address a little bit more questions on this later if there is any. Enhancing the student experience may be the most important and critical factor at schools today. I know it is the most relevant topic I'm asked. How can facilities and real estate enhance the student experience? We have come up with 7 building blocks of educational facilities which we felt were critical to sustain success. Imagination and creativity need to flow. Innovation from the private sector should be discussed. Proactive behavior needs to be championed. Students need to be put first. Technology embraced. Culture and brand need to be integrated to reflect values. Out with the old, in with the new. Just because you build it does not mean they will come. I think when we think about live, work, play being championed so much with the urban core and suburban areas on the private and corporate world, people want to work close to where they live, close to where they shop, eat, relax, and are entertained and exercise. Well, data tells us student wants the same thing in today's world. To the extent we can provide a live, learn, play environment, student success, which has been measured in many forms, can be attained and grown. Take, for example, the case study that you see right now, which is DePaul University in Lincoln Park, which is in downtown Chicago. This development was built 10 years ago and still has a massive waiting list. DePaul ground leased the land to a third-party developer adjacent to campus for housing, retail, and restaurants. Students flock to it and obviously continue to. Working in the stores, socializing at the restaurants, cafes, collaborating in the open areas, and living there for school, all while being across the street from campus. Now, we do realize not everyone can take advantage of aspects like this and opportunities like this, but this service serves as a successful example of enhancing the student experience. Well, that's it for all the good stuff. The takeaways, if you got nothing out of this or multitask while listening, I'm not offended. But we do have 4 ideas which we think that you should act on proactively. The first is have a plan, right? Have a plan and be prepared to implement. I think that's very apropos scenario and need right now. Efficiently run your operations. Know exactly what's happening, what's going on the campus, and how you can continue to drive savings. Accountability. Obviously we can't embark on any projects without understanding, our fiscal responsibility and being accountable back to that. And then the fourth is innovation. Obviously, innovation and value creation. These are the critical steps to kind of taking the next phase of your master plan, or attracting the students of today and tomorrow into to your school. The next page, if we don't mind, we'll talk a little bit about Cushman and Wakefield's value to the education sector. We don't want to brag a lot about ourselves, but I think by looking at this slide, you can see a little bit about our platform, how we can serve the needs to the education sector holistically or on a one-off project scenario. There are many ways to demonstrate value. We feel we have allocated an uncommon amount of resources to ensure our platform is the most robust and diverse in the industry. We created it for that exact reason. We're the only real estate company that has a group that focuses on the education sector 100% of the time. We have over 150 clients in 7 service lines in the education space. It represents about 5% of our overall revenue. So it is something that we are serious about, and we'd love to hear from you if you have thoughts and ideas or challenges that need to be solved. Thanks so much, and appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you, Craig. This is Megan from Converge. We have Ann here too, and this brings us into the Q&A portion of our session. Ann and I and our team have put together some questions just to guide through with Craig. We're going to walk through those, and then if you have any questions that you would like us to ask, please submit those in the questions box, and we will make sure that we cover those with Craig today.
Excellent. Great. Megan, the first question that's been submitted in relation to the examples and the research that was done, tiers 1, 2, and 3, how would you recommend that schools use that most effectively?
So I'm going to go back to this. Can you just, I'm going to go back. Do you mind? Should we just go back to this?
No, that's perfect.
Right. So can you just repeat the question, because I was going back while you were asking? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the question was, based on the examples that you shared with schools in tiers 1, 2, and 3, how would you recommend that people most effectively use this information?
Well, I think it's, so a couple of different points. So one is start thinking about it as it relates to your campus, right? So as it relates to your campus, are you matching, some of what your students actually want, right? So are you thinking about, what their expectations? So I guess the thought is are you doing what you think is right and what the administration and faculty, or actually what the student needs and what the family say is important in their experience? So I think that's the most critical one. Are you surveying your students, first understanding what they want and need, right? And then are you meeting some of those expectations by then delivering them? I think that's really important, right? And again, so I think that's the aspect, right? So once you understand what you're solving for, because every college and university campus is different, right? From an urban to a suburban campus. there's a lot of different wants and needs, but I think first you need to do is understand what your own set of students want, and then apply it to and then apply that strategy to their school, because everybody wants their voice to be heard, right? Everybody wants that.
Yeah. So Craig, this is one of my favorite slides in this presentation because I feel like this is incredibly usable information. So if I understand that I am a tier 2 school and updated housing or safety and security are two of the really important priorities for my students, I think it would be really helpful to start doing qualitative focus groups with students, as well as maybe some quantitative surveys to really find out more about what are the key things within each of these buckets. But I think this is incredibly important information because it directs me to what these students' interests are, and then it allows me to go in and specifically look at my prospective students or current students and to determine within each of these categories or buckets what are things that I might be able to improve upon in order to enhance that student experience.
I think that's right. And I mean, what do besides enjoying their college experience and studying really hard and being, what else do they want to hear? Well, they want their voice to be heard, right? That's what we've heard today, right? And over the last few years, and I think it's going to be even more relative more relevant moving forward, into 2020 and 2030, right? Is there's a lot of empowerment with college students, right? And they want to make sure that their voice is heard, whether that's civically, whether that's socially, whether that's politically. And I think that also is going to be a determining factor of where they choose to go to school, and then sharing that experience with their peers and friends.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and along those lines, Craig, and Anne too, I was going to ask, if we're thinking about the marketer's role and responsibility and sort of making sure that the student experience is enhanced through facilities and operations, how do we need to think about that? What's the context there, and what's the value for the campus that's responsible for the brand?
Yeah, so I would tell you this, that again, our feedback tells us that anytime a student, a family, a vendor, a new person talks on campus and enters your space somewhere, right? Whether that's in your athletic facility, whether that's in your housing facility, whether that's in your academic facility, whether that's in your student union, it's the way it looks, the way it's presented, is a reflection of your brand. Right, and so I think that's the aspect that I would think about is take a stroll through your campus, right? Walk through there, understand what do you feel like when you walk through there, right? Do things need to be updated? Do things need to be maintained? Is everything clean? Does it look the right way? Is that a reflection of how you're running your school and your institution? And how does and put yourself in somebody else's shoes on what you think their perception is. So I think that's really the key from a marketing perspective is it's a direct reflection of your brand and how you run your business. And so again, if you walk through and don't feel the way that you think that you should, well then there's some things that you need to look at and review a little bit harder the next time. That's just our opinion.
Yeah, and in thinking about that, Craig, do you have a recommendation based on your work with clients and the higher education space, how often things like that should take place, sort of an evaluation at a high level of, whether they're just walking through, any information you could share there?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple. So one, there should be some type of, two scenarios, right? There should be obviously a master plan and some type of real estate plan, right, which fits into that master plan. But, from so that should be done, or updated, every few years. And I think, and it's continuing to evolve over time. I mean, what we're seeing from our clients is that, you create the master plan, then you add to it, as your, enrollment and surveys and needs kind of shift and come align. But I think that from a contract perspective or a vendor perspective, we do think that those should be looked at almost every year, just to make sure that you're continuing to be in line, with the kind of going rates and costs and prices of what's out there on the open market.
Excellent. Great. Quick, I have a question that was submitted from the audience. How do graduate and adult students fit into this tier mix, in your opinion?
Into the tier mix, it's a good question. I would say this is probably tiered a little bit more to, I would say it's probably tiered a little bit more to the undergrad student. It depends on, I would say it probably depends on, what schools were in the mix, right? And so again, that's we have to come back on that data, but I would say this is probably more focused on the undergraduate student.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. Good.
Craig, can you talk a little bit more? We have a question on what other clients you guys have worked with in the education space and what you've learned. I know you shared a couple of case studies, but
Sure.
Could you elaborate more on your client list?
Yeah, so again, it ranges, it ranges, from, from let's just call it big, large, small, right? From everybody you can see from a big state-run institution where University of Maryland to University of California, Berkeley to University of South Florida, to more of, some of the more East Coast schools, right, as well. So Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Brown, Georgetown, Cornell. We've done a lot of work for Stanford, Vanderbilt, in terms of, and that's all at varying degrees, right? So for some we do custodial and janitorial and maintenance work for. Some we do project management and development manage, right? Some that we just want a project with the University of North Texas in terms of helping them build a master plan, right? So it just ranges in the range of, depending on what the needs are and where the relationships are. But I would say those are probably a good reflection of some of the work that we've done.
That's great. And a caveat to that, what do you think smaller schools can do to create innovation through facilities? We've seen that, the New York Times article out there talking about how important, having those buildings are, creating architectural experiences that inspire. What advice do you have for smaller schools in your experience to cultivate that on campus?
It's interesting, because we've gotten a handful of questions and comments about this, right? I mean, so everything from Roosevelt University in Chicago that has 4,500 students to Rider University in New Jersey, which is just down the street from Princeton, who has 2,500 students, right? So again, I think the thought process there, those questions come about how do we leverage certain things to the private sector, right? How do we, again, become more and more, right? Because they don't have the budgets, or at least we've seen, right? That we've seen they don't have the budgets to go out and spend or leverage certain things, but I think they have to more and more today look to the private side, which is what the example of Roosevelt University in Chicago and Rider University has is they've heard a lot of different things about it. They've seen other schools doing it and peers doing it, but they don't really know how to do it themselves. So they've come to ask those questions about, hey, here's our campus. What can we do? What do you recommend for that aspect? So I think it's more of leveraging the private side and trying to ask for their help in trying to figure out and how do we unlock different projects and make our institution not only more credible from a aesthetic and in campus setting, but also from an operational side, how do we gain access to capital that it was locked before.
Excellent. Craig, there was a question submitted saying how much they enjoyed the case study on DePaul and the space utilization. And the question is, how would you approach utilizing both the private community further in better understanding space utilization for buildings and campus facilities?
Yeah, I would tell you this, that it's a really interesting because, and I don't know, Lincoln Park, Chicago, again, it's a very valuable piece of real estate, right? So DePaul sits in the heart of Lincoln Park, which is a very affluent neighborhood in downtown Chicago, right? And DePaul sits in the heart of that. So a lot of the real estate that either they've owned, through a long time, right, is just valuable pieces of real estate. So I think when you look at, leveraging something like that in an environment or there's a lot of attraction from a lot of different people, right? And so I think that was really what it, because it started out with, hey, we don't really know what to do with this, right? We don't really want to spend the money to go build this all ourselves, because what type of return that we would get, we don't see it there being there. And so can we go talk to other people that have said, hey, these are some of the goals and objectives that we want to accomplish, right? Can someone else help us get there? And can we leverage, our real estate and or unused land or non-core asset to do that? And I think that's really how this project started, right? I mean, and again, there was nothing there before, right? And so again, I think the success, has, it's something that the university continues to sell, right? Is that, hey, here's this, you can live in off campus right here, and you'd be right across the street from campus and have all these different amenities, and it's a huge selling point for the university from an undergraduate perspective, living in the city and in modern accommodations.
Right.
Does that answer the question?
It does. Are there any urban areas or schools that you've worked with that have utilized space in a creative way that maybe the real estate isn't as valuable as like Lincoln Park in Chicago?
Yeah, no. So example, Rider University, right? So it's a and we're not giving any trade secrets away, but it's a school, right, that is, right off the expressway almost, it's 2 miles away from Princeton. And, again, it's in a suburban setting, right? The whole campus is on, 100 acres, right? And so they have this, so Rider University is one. And again, their whole thought is, it's almost essentially the front porch of their campus, right? They have this vacant 10 to 12 acres sitting right there that students play in, right? They have extracurricular activities go on there, but they're feeling that from student surveys that students want a little bit more. They don't want to have to drive 2 and 3 miles away. They want something on their campus. So to the extent that they can leverage some housing as well as retail, really digging into this live, learn, play atmosphere, right, that you're seeing, they're feeling that they can accomplish that on their campus with a third party and with the private sector.
Great. Thanks for that information, Craig.
Yeah, and Craig, we have one other question submitted too, since we elaborated a little bit on the DePaul example. What was your favorite part of the Cal Berkeley project?
Yeah, so I guess it was just seeing the people's faces or seeing the administration's face when we could put the plan in place over a period of time and drive the savings and actually do it, right? Because all of a sudden here we had, multiple buildings that we didn't know what to do with, right, or couldn't fill, and then all of a sudden we came to the realization that after we studied a handful of their, programmatic and research-related projects that, we could shift a lot of this back on campus. So I think it was just seeing the face of people that, like, oh my gosh, right? we didn't realize there was this much value in looking at some of the items that we kind of just took for granted.
Good. There's one more question submitted on that top 7 slide, which I think is a few slides in. What are schools?
Wait, say that again, Ann. The top what slide?
Top 7. What are the schools working on the most? So I think it was towards the end of the webinar when you were looking at.
Here?
No.
Sorry. Oh, here.
Enhancing the student experience. So the question was, what are schools working on the most?
It's interesting. I would probably say teaching and learning, room and board, and third-party partnerships. Those are the things that you hear about the most. That's what our clients are asking us about, right? There is so much intrigue about what everybody else is doing, right? And should we be doing that, right? So again, that's when we talked about a little bit in the beginning of keeping up with the Joneses, right? Is there so much, hey, gosh, this school is doing this school is doing this, in a peer setting when people apply to schools, these are the schools that we're competing with, right? Should we be doing those things too, right? So I think that is, that's part of it, right? So in terms of understanding, that's part of, should we be thinking about third-party relationships and partnerships? But I think one of the interesting things about, right? And it's a topic of discussion that we're hearing a lot with architects and around that cater towards the higher education sector is a big question is, what are we going to do with lecture halls? What are we going to do with them? Because there is a tremendous amount of unused space that goes into those, right? That again, the fact of the matter is we're not seeing those lecture halls filled on a consistent basis. They're just not, right? So what is the highest and best use of these particular spaces? How we can figure that out? That's a huge aspect right now that we're seeing, at the university level, which is I think is a really cool area. To start to explore because it hasn't been explored for so long, right? And I think from the room and board side, I just feel that most schools that they have just older boarding options, and the students of today, right? That the average family has 1.5 to 2 kids, 2 children. Right? So more or less, those students are having their own rooms growing up. And so I think the fact of the matter is, as innovation and creativity continues to go on, you have to see the more modern housing options because that's what students want. They're not used to sharing a room. They're not used to sharing bathrooms. They're not used to that, right? And so again, those environments, they're looking to be more modern, to be updated, and the quality options from the food perspective, it really does aid in the attraction and retention of students. So those 3 things, again, that we're seeing, again, if you're asking where we're spending a lot of our time on and thinking about and diagnosing, those are the 3 areas. Not to say those other ones aren't important. We're not saying that, but that's where the conversations we're having.
Yeah, and so the tier slide was one of my very favorites because I feel like it's applicable to not only CFOs, but chief marketing officers and other individuals. This is probably my second favorite slide because it really looks across all different areas on campus. Are there any, and I feel like a lot of the time there's one individual on a campus who's responsible for safety and security, but potentially they're not working with other folks in technology or teaching and learning in order to look at that holistic student experience. So are there any schools that you're working with that have a structure in place that brings all of these individuals together where they're
not?
Yeah, really.
Not that we've seen, and maybe there are that we haven't talked to, but from our client perspective, there's not, right? The people that are making the calls on these are all is potentially, we have maybe 1 or 2 of these, can be linked together, but all of these are a different hierarchy or structure within the college, within the system, right? And so, and that's sometimes frustrating to navigate.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as I look at this and really think about student experience and ownership of it, there are just so many components that you've brought up here that I think it would be a really interesting conversation with key members of cabinet and positions on campuses to really look at how do we take these 7 core areas and really focus on integrating them to provide a more comprehensive and better quality student experience.
Yeah, right. I think that's right.
Excellent.
Well, I think that covers all of the questions we had submitted. Craig, we just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. As Anne mentioned, the content is absolutely fabulous. I think that I wanted just a few housekeeping items. So for everybody on the line, the recording and slides will be sent out tomorrow, so stay tuned for those. We will be following up with a blog post that recaps this and shares some of the infographics with more insights from Craig and his team. Again, thanks, Craig, so much.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
What happened to